switch them out. And we all went, Mike, you can't do that. And he said, I gave them a year. They had a year. I told them the vision of the journey we were going on, and they could come on the bus on the journey. But after a year, they still weren't bought in. They still hadn't understood, and maybe it was time for them to get off the bus.
This is exactly the way followed by ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid. If you cannot do this, we'll celebrate your farewell after 1 year. This is how he's giving the smart government in Dubai. Same way. If you don't do this, after 1 year, we'll celebrate your farewell. Dubai.
I think this is a wrong behavior, but he has to be patient and to start changing the culture of the people step by step, instead of firing them, because most probably he will lose the most employees which have the experience of the room.
Exactly, you want to keep the good people. You're so right, yes. And the, I don't know if we have anything we can draw on here. But,
Can I ask for
No, it's okay.
It's all right.
Yeah.
We can steal it from next door. Shall I quickly rip it up? No, man. Oh, yeah.
Anyway,
Should we continue?
so yes.
Well, yeah, if what I can do is I can send you the stakeholder tool that I use to identify different communities of people.
It's been rolled over, so you might have to get up and go to it.
Yeah, okay. Perfect, yeah, okay. So this is a bit of improvisation. But I'd invite you to use this tool. It's very simple. Take a flip chart. Yeah, flip chart. And think about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. This is a tool that a professor at Henley called Anna Bateson created, and I, with another colleague of mine, added to it, so we've made it a bit more complicated, but I think it works. So if you have this as your level of understanding, and this is the answer to your point about, yes, but you need other people. Yeah? This is the tool I use to find the right people to talk to first. Okay? So level of understanding, high, low. And this is the level of emotional engagement. Yeah, so we're talking emotions again. So in this middle part, you have people who are unengaged. And it's fine to be unengaged with a new initiative when you haven't yet been involved, when you're busy with other things. It's not fine to be in the unengaged box if you are senior, if you are supposed to be helping to drive the change, or if you have a lot of knowledge to give, but you don't want, you're effectively sabotaging. So what we do is we take sticky notes, post-it notes, and we put the names of the people or the names of the teams around our DevOps transformation, and we decide where we're going to put them. So there are some people who we may put our post-its here. This is not their personalities, it's their attitude now, this moment. So it's like a photograph, it's a snapshot in time. Anybody can be in any of these boxes at any time. So people who have a middle level of emotional understanding, but a good level of intellectual understanding, become your spectators.
They are quite dangerous.
They can be very dangerous.
This is very bad.
This is the easiest way to kill a project. So, project.
Initiative.
I'm unlearning. Yeah, so these are our saboteurs, maybe.
Not always. But
Not always. always, because sometimes it's simply that people are,
They're on the fence, aren't they?
they're not sabotaging you, but they're not helping you. So on this side is the negative side, so very low emotional engagement, and you've got the cynics. Now, cynicism is from a point of view of low level of knowledge, it's just, oh, this will never work. Some people are cynics because they are just so tired of another change.
Procrastinators.
Yes, and absolutely. Well, either they're naturally, because we all have lives outside work, we've all struggled and we've had problems to deal with. Sometimes it is an attitude which some people have. But imagine the power of converting a cynic. Okay, more on that later. So on the more positive side, a cynic who is knowledgeable is we call a critic. Now, what benefits do critics give us? Sorry? Yeah, yes, absolutely. What else? What other benefits do critics give us?
To show you your weaknesses.
Yes, that's right. And so we as change leaders have to listen. Our challenge is that many critics don't always use the language or the tone or the timing that makes us feel we want to listen. And we can be blind sometimes to some aspects of the change. So they are very useful if we are a strong change leader ourselves. So on this side we have the enthusiasts. So people who love change, anything new. I'll start a process on Monday, I'm bored of it on Wednesday. These people bring energy, they bring passion. What's the risk?
Obstacles. They are obstacles. They have low skills.
Yeah, exactly. As you see, they are low on the level of understanding. So maybe they are telling people wrong stuff. They're telling people that in Agile you don't need to do any documentation.
Yes.
We're doing Agile because we have daily stand-ups.
We're doing Agile because we do daily stand-ups. That's your enthusiasm. Yeah? Now, remember we've said a number of times, you need to find strategic people at different levels in management, in different communities. These are your ambassadors. And you need an ambassador, a friend, an articulate, knowledgeable and emotionally involved, engaged colleague in each of the areas that you're targeting. And that's the
stakeholder map.
So-
We use it a lot when we're doing workshops with clients. What we ask people to do is put post-it notes of people's names on
Yes.
it.
Yes.
Sometimes they're like a bit scared of putting names on, so they'll just put like,
Yes.
it's the business analyst, so in that area. But the one thing that we always do is
Yes.
we always destroy the evidence. Don't leave that.
Don't
stuff
leave it in the
going.
workshop room after you've
Usually it's not a good practice to put names. You can put nicknames.
You can do that.
Even in a project management,
Of course
the
you
project
can,
charts,
yeah.
we have
Yeah.
stakeholder.
Or we will be fired.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
some people might not be
The
too
good-
happy if they came across it and discovered
the
you
good
put it in
question-
the cynics box. Yes.
A good question. One will put his manager in which box?
Yes. Yes.
Put them where they are. Don't
Ambassadors.
show them. Yeah.
So my manager is by default is ambassador.
So we need these people to help support us when we're trying to push evolutionary change through organisations. So we love this slide. It's from a guy called Mustafa Cato. I've just edited it slightly to update a couple of things. Who's an IBM chap, but he talks about these, kind of breaks it down in quite a lovely, simple table about what we're trying to do, what we're trying to change from traditional DevOps to, traditional IT to the modern DevOps, if you like. So remember I said little and often, so we're really trying to get beyond big batch sizes. So we're trying to get away from very large requirements documents, we're trying to get away from large batches of features, which means that we have to release them frequently. So this is underpinning much of what we're trying to do, trying to move away from these silos towards these autonomous cells. We don't like centralised scheduling, and the way that centralised scheduling and centralised work itself is things like change approval boards, which I think I already said is an anti-pattern. Again, the State of DevOps reports has discovered that there is a negative correlation between change approval boards and high-performing organisations. It's quite obvious, I think, because if we've got a change approval board, we've added steps to our process that we're going to have to wait and get checklists potentially for, and it just adds friction and unnecessary waste into it. So we like this decentralised idea. Releases, I love this idea. It should be like breathing. So as a kind of list of words that I don't like in technology or phrases, and one is release weekends, right? None of us should be having to go to the office to deploy some software at the weekend. It makes no sense. It's not good life practice. So we want that. So we want to be doing it so often because we can do it because we've got little pieces. It's like low risk. We can just get on with it and do it frequently. It did really make me laugh one day because we were doing looking at this with or talking about being like breathing, and one of the team said like driving on snow, and I was like, you clearly don't live in the UK, because in the UK we get a flake of snow and everything just grinds to a complete halt. Nothing happens. Probably a bit like what would happen here if it ever snowed. But it's, you know, it's very true. And shortly after that, I was on an aeroplane to Reykjavik in Iceland, and we were just starting to descend, and I was wondering about the aeroplane as I often do, and the pilots came onto the intercom and they said, oh, we're just starting our descent into Reykjavik. There's a blizzard on the ground, so hopefully we'll be able to land. And then I remembered that the Icelandics have an immense sense of humour. Of course, they do it all the time. They're like, yeah, we're always landing in a blizzard. It's absolutely fine. But yeah, that's how releases should feel. You shouldn't be tense. It's just like, oh, we're just going to release something. Doink. It's gone. It's fine. Not scary. Information. This idea of actionable information. We create a lot of information, like I described earlier, reports that people don't read. It's all sorts of documentation that we create as part of multiple projects that just rots in SharePoint. No one ever looks at it. This is a big one. This is coming back to the trust idea. So this idea about failure, we talked about this quite a lot today actually, that there are different shades of failure, right? We're not encouraging people to catastrophically fail their production systems so that their business can't operate. What we're trying to encourage people to do is build reliability in, to avoid catastrophic failure, but build an environment where people have the courage, the capability, and the psychological and systemic safety to experiment, to try new things, because we know that success comes out of multiple failures. We have to try again before stuff works out. Metrics, big one is flow, right? Just think about flow and looking at the value outcome as it travels through its value stream and how it comes out the other end. And then a big one about definition of done. You know, when we're siloed, we are in our bubble. So, done my job, that's it. That's my definition of done.
It's running on my machine. So I'm done when it's running on my machine. It is running on my machine.
Yeah,
Running on my machine, yes,
Done.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Not running in live.
Yeah.
Whereas what we really want to think about is our value outcome realised. So, comms and odds, target operating models, and organisational designs. So, quite a big topic for lots of organisations that we work with, especially when we're talking about often taking some kind of hierarchical structure and turning it into autonomous cells. People often freak out, particularly at the senior exec levels. So freak out, people get scared when we talk about changing an organisational design, especially when they've just maybe done one. And so it's a big job to reorganise a traditional hierarchy. You have to go to HR to avoid getting yourself into trouble by kind of accidentally putting somebody out of a job. You have to tell everybody that their job's changing. People are like, I don't want that job, I'm not happy with what you've done, all that kind of stuff happens. So we have to be quite careful. Any tips on landing a new Tom or Odd? This is the McKinsey. This is what the McKinseys do to you, right?
McKinsey say, well, we'll redraw your organisation. There you go.
Bye-bye.
Ciao. Yeah. I think everything that we've said so far really applies, is that it's taking people on the journey with you step by step, understanding their emotional state, understanding their level of understanding, finding your ambassadors, teaching, keeping your ambassadors close to you. The one mistake, I've made this mistake myself in some transformational changes, because the people who make the most noise and who are the most critical often contribute the least to a change. The ones that you want to communicate with regularly are your ambassadors, your community of practice.
Those loud people are what we often call in the UK a mood hoover. Doesn't that make sense?
Yes, they suck, they take the energy
out.
out of the air, like the air conditioning system takes the dust out of the air, you know.
So it's tricky, and Spotify say that an organisational chart is just an illusion, and actually the reality of how our social networks work is quite different from what you would draw on a piece of paper. And I quite liked to introduce kind of Conway's law, if you haven't heard it before at this point, where we learn that the systems that we design look like the organisations that we have, which is why we often end up with very tightly coupled systems, because we've got these kind of siloed organisations with handoffs and dependencies, so we replicate that. So if you think of it a different way, if you had autonomous teams that are working separately, that are effectively loosely coupled, you're more likely to design an architecture that is loosely coupled, say something like microservices. So you can see that relationship between the human system and the technological system. One of the traps, or it's not really a trap, but one of the conversations we have a lot with people is, okay, our development team have gone agile, we've got agile squads.
Can I ask you
Yes, of course.
regarding the previous slide?
Go back,
Yes.
yeah.
You was talking here about that the organization need software design or system design, making a structure as a copy of the organization, communication or culture?
Communication, I would say. The cultural design is quite
I know,
hard to
yes,
describe.
I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
Because I believe that the culture of organization has a big impact on the way you are going to design your product or your service or your mission.
Yeah.
Communication is an aspect of the culture.
Yes. So we
So-
haven't got the cultural iceberg in
But
this
it's not
one.
the,
but-
it's not the only aspect of the culture.
No.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe so.
culture, we think of values and
Maybe so.
behaviours.
Yeah.
It's quite hard to draw a cultural design. I could draw a communication model of who tends to talk to
Yeah,
who.
yeah, that's right. If you imagine when you walk into a building, when you walk into your offices in the morning, who communicates to who most regularly? How many times do you talk to which people? How many times
Do you pick up the phone or Slack somebody?
or send a Slack message, or so it's the pulse, it's the regularity of the communication, and also the intimacy of the communication. So how, for example, if you meet a senior manager in the corridor and you say hello, that's a very low level communication. If you meet a senior manager in the corridor and they say, I'm really interested in this new DevOps initiative, have you got 5 minutes to talk to me about it? That's quality communication. So it's,
I think
Those-
communication.
though it is communication.
No, I'm not saying I'm not judging this topic.
Yeah.
I'm just raise the note
Yeah.
to understand, because I believe the culture is the most important
Element.
factor impacting any changing the organization,
Agreed.
changing the
Absolutely.
system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I believe it should be the organization culture structure, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think it's just difficult to draw
Yeah, no,
culture. Yeah.
it is. It's communication structure. The culture is, if you like, bigger. Culture is the water that the communication is swimming in, if you like.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe culture, yes, communication is part of the culture.
Yeah,
We
yes,
communicate
It's a
based on our culture,
subsection. Yeah.
Yeah.
but also we take decisions based on our culture. We
Mm.
do many things based on our culture, and those things most probably will impact the design.
Yeah. No, I agree.
This quote, by the way, was quoted on 1967.
Yes.
Quite
And you-
old now.
I've got selfie, but then
I had that
that's
selfie
right.
as a guy.
Yeah. So, talking kind of organisational design, what tends to happen in organisations is the development teams, whether it's a traditional software development team or a new digital team that have been put in the organisation to build a new digital front end. Those guys go agile, so they start building Scrum teams normally, and then the DevOps conversation starts, which is basically about agile system administration and how to involve IT operations in that agile conversation at the very core of it. So at that point, we often have a conversation about, can we put IT ops people in the Scrum teams, or should they be liaisons? Have we got enough IT ops people? Are the IT ops people broad skilled enough? Because there's no point putting a security person in that Scrum team and a network person in that Scrum team and a storage person in that Scrum team. It's not going to achieve anything. So we kind of have these discussions about the organisational design and whether it should be a matrix model, and I picked this bit out of the DevOps handbook because it says actually you can have IT operations as a separate functional team still. The important thing is always to think about the flow and the value stream and make sure that there aren't any constraints or any friction as that piece of value moves through the steps it needs to go through in order to get live. So it can work. DevOps handbook talks about Google and various other organisations that have retained that sort of model.
So this screenshot, we have two pieces, the right side and the left side.
Yeah, it might be worth talking through it.
Actually, I cannot see.
Yeah, so we've got functional versus market orientation basically. So on one side, we're talking about having feature teams, so having like a Spotify model where everything's product oriented and we've embedded operationals expertise in our feature teams. And then the other side is saying, actually, we can have our product or our feature teams, but we're still going to have our IT operations people separate. So you could say the Spotify model is that latter model because they have the infrastructure squads, which are effectively separate IT operations teams.
So this is what we have now. We have a separate between the operation team and the development team.
And that model works for lots of people. I think there's a tendency in our market to say, right, we're going to create pure hybrid teams everywhere. Actually, having dev-oriented functional feature teams seems to work with the centralised operations teams as well. So it's an either-or situation. And this is a conversation that we end up having a lot, increasingly in the last 2 years, as people have adopted more and more agile, is okay, we've got 10 agile teams now, and we've got 20 agile teams, and we've got system dependencies. How do we scale agile? And then we end up having a bit of a kind of religious conversation. Is it safe? Is it less? Is it distributed agile? What scaled agile flavour should we choose? And our view at Range 4 is that you don't choose a scaled agile flavour, you look at the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So
this is the result we need to reach by applying DevOps.
Yes. And in an ideal world, we would use Conway's law and not have any tightly coupled applications. In the real world, we have lots of organisations that have lots of legacy systems that have evolved over many years and have lots of dependencies and are tightly coupled. So actually we do have dependencies that we cannot remove overnight. We do always recommend that organisations make a special effort at embedding architectural expertise in every feature team in order to focus on breaking those dependencies, and it's another mantra: break dependencies, don't manage them. When we manage dependencies, we end up with release trains, change approval boards, having to use scaled agile frameworks, all these kind of things that can be avoided. So, kind of linked to some of that is this idea around safety culture. So, as we talked about quite a lot, there's this kind of foundation stone of trust that we want to create, and we can build that over time. And we have these ideas of how we build trust into an organisation. So we talked about catastrophic failure earlier on and how to avoid it. And there's kind of two sides to this conversation. we need to help our humans behave in a way where they are not afraid of failure, and naturally we all are, because we were mostly brought up that failure is something that is shameful and embarrassing and humiliating. We're not generally taught that it is a path to success. So we need to help our leaders help their people understand that they can experiment and it's okay to make mistakes, but importantly also we need to build reliability into our systems using things like continuous integration to make sure that defects don't get out into production, using limited blast radius mechanisms like canary deployments so that we only try things out with a small group of people, so if it does go wrong we haven't brought down our entire customer base. So there's lots of different techniques that you can see on here. One of the ones that we were talking about today actually might be interested in a quick audience poll. ChatOps. Who's using ChatOps? Everyone know what ChatOps is? I'll do a quick definition of ChatOps. You're all familiar, I'm sure, with instant messaging and probably with group instant messaging as well, so your WhatsApp or your Slack. ChatOps takes a group instant message channel and adds system calls and responses into it. So you could call Jenkins from it and ask it about the latest changes, or you could push something through Jenkins or receive an alert from Dynatrace, push your report, push the chat conversation into Jira and associate it with the ticket or the feature that you're working on. So it integrates the man and machine interface. Very, very quick for organisations to set up, very, very powerful. One of our kind of quick wins that comes up on a lot of the engagements that we have with our customers. So that was kind of brings me to the conclusion of what we brought to talk about. So if you've got any questions or any topics you wanted to discuss more, or tool chains or whatever, then really happy to.
I have a question.
I do have a question.
ما في الأول.
I mean, basically in DevOps section, I would say, during the transformation from legacy to going to hybrid or going to automated solution, what are the major parameters? Like, I mean, the transition happens with a lot of fluctuations, a lot of obnoxious environment, where the stakeholders take a lot of interest with the cost and with the management and the fundamentals. So how the transition can be smoother, like especially in our culture in Saudi Arabia, we have a legacy system like around 90%. The 10% is just a small initiate what's been happening for past 2-3 years. So how we can implement such areas, and what things we need to be focused more? Is it by region, or is it by the culture which we have to develop?
And the legacy conversation is really interesting. It's really hotted up, I think, and developed over the past 4 years or so. I think there was a sort of DevOps myth a few years back that you couldn't do DevOps in a legacy environment. It was for new digital web front-end type systems only. And in fact, the first iteration of the DevOps leader course that we took for the DevOps Institute kind of had that attitude in it. What we've seen working with our customers, and notably again Lloyds Banking Group in the UK, is huge success in developing DevOps solutions around legacy systems, in particular in their case a ZOS IBM Z series mainframe system. So much so that they've won several awards in the UK for what they've done with that system. And we, in 2018, did a cross-bank assessment at Lloyds. So we assessed 10 business units. So Lloyds Bank has got business units for general insurance, core insurance, pensions, fraud, commercial banking, trading. There's a whole host of different banking areas. And actually, when we looked at that mainframe team, they scored one of the highest, we call it our DFI, which is our DevOps Fluency Index. It's a number we give an organisation out of 100 to express their current fluency. And they scored in the 80s, which is really, really high for us for that. And interestingly, part of the reason that they've been able to do that is because they had autonomy, which brings us back to culture. So they managed to do something really spectacular with the legacy system, because unlike the rest of the organisation, they weren't tied to loads of third parties, which is a big problem in that particular organisation. organisation, and they also were very creative in the way that they funded. So whilst they were still receiving project-led funding, they basically received the funding and dumped it all into one backlog, and then they created a number of backlogs that came off it, and then they effectively charged the business back per story point. So it was quite interesting to see, because you think that the legacy thing is a technology issue, but actually it was the culture that allowed them to break those constraints. And the other thing that we often think about mainframes is that you can't do microservices and stuff in there. In fact, our original definitions of containers in our original DevOps Foundation course very much talked about Linux only, but you can run Linux native containers and ZOS native containers now on a Z series. So there are technology solutions from, you know, I can say the big old vendors, IBM and Computer Associates. They are coming up with automation solutions admittedly later than the new cool stuff, but they are addressing it.
May I add something? I believe it's not matter of, the question is not am I going to change or not? The question is when I'm going to change. So you don't have option in this era. If you don't change, you will die.
Yeah.
If you can, because somebody else in your business domain will be faster than you, and will get the more market share than you, then you will be die after a while. So.
Yes, but you have to be careful to ensure that you change in the right direction.
Yeah, Gartner saying that there are 5 reasons why DevOps transformation efforts are failing. The first one is inability to manage the change. So manage the change is something serious we should do. Because you are changing, so either you success or you break your firm apart. So you have to manage your changes.
I think one of the mistakes I've seen legacy organisations make, organisations with big legacy systems, is that they have decided that the DevOps transformation is going to be
Tomorrow.
It's going to be tomorrow, and it's going to be big.
Yeah.
And
they've gone for that transformation.
They throw some budget at it, and of course the technologists think, fantastic, we've persuaded management to spend money on the transformation. Where have they got the money from? Keeping the lights on. Yeah. So they've moved. What they've done is they've taken the energy of the organisation into a new transformation, and then they've reduced the capacity to manage the ongoing. So it is about resourcing it properly. And if you can't resource it big, do it small. Do it small, do it local, and do a lot of little and often. So you know the theory of the islands of excellence. I don't know if you've come across this. As a Stephen Covey thing. But if you can create some really passionate, really successful, small units in your organisation, and then those people become your ambassadors. And you will start to see, both from top up, from bottom up and top down, you will start to see people who are persuaded by their success. I want some of that. And that can take 2 years.
Yeah, these are big journeys.
They're big journeys.
Often when we're talking about legacy, we talk about technical debt. What we're talking about is monolithic applications. So we often call them big ball of mud or a spaghetti application. So the reason these are so challenging for us in DevOps, if you think of them as a big massive cube, every time you want to test or release this thing, you have to do the whole thing. And it's huge, and it takes ages, and it's really painful, and things go wrong, which is why we have to do this big whole thing. So in a new world, what we want to do is create lots of little mini cubes, which are our microservices, and they talk to each other, and they're relatively independent, and we can test and deploy and release that little bit without worrying about the rest of it. The problem with legacy is how you get from here to here. And we do have some customers who have gone, right, we'll just rewrite the whole thing. And they tend to be customers that are in very low risk markets where they've got a monopoly and they're pretty cash rich. And over 2 years, they can pretty much burn their cash reserves. You know, even 70 developers for 2 years is like pretty expensive to not really get anything to build from the ground up. So this kind of conversation that you were saying about if you don't do it, you won't survive. We have a similar conversation around the monolith. Like, it looks really difficult and really expensive to do. So you've got some choices. you either spend a load of money rewriting and re-architecting the thing from the ground up, which is incredibly risky and incredibly expensive, or you do nothing and you die. So we've got one customer in the UK, an insurance company, who have got one of these, built an assembler. They've got two guys in their early 60s who are about to retire, who are the only guys that know how to run it. And it didn't used to matter, because this was their cash cow. It was like they're the leading insurer for that particular type of insurance in the UK. It's a health insurance policy though, and they've always been able to kind of change the surrounding cash, the way that the cash and the charges are done on it. But they've got two competitors. One has decided to do policies based on what we call the body mass index, which is just a thing that says how healthy you are based on your height and weight ratio. And another competitor which said, actually, we're going to write really complex policies, but we're going to make it really easy to gather that information. And these guys need to change this in order to be able to change their system and to be able to compete with these two guys coming from either side. So then the conversation goes, right, well, you can't do nothing, because that's your cash cow and you know you're going to get out competed. So what we talk about then is this idea of, we call it erosion. So this idea that we've identified this little cube in here is a thing that we need to change a lot. It's a high value part of that application. So actually we're going to take that and we're going to make that into a microservice. And then we're going to identify the next high value bit. And one by one, we're going to rebuild that application. I always think of it as a bit like some 1960s science fiction, like, you know, when you kind of do a transporter and you kind of pixelate over there. It's a bit like that. And it takes time, and I've made it sound really easy. And when we've done this with our customers, you do that and then you discover all this stuff that you didn't know was there. But then you learn about it and you fix it.
But this is much better than nothing, than doing nothing.
Doing nothing, yeah. Doing nothing is not an option.
Very dangerous.
Scenario.
Doing nothing, very dangerous.
Yeah.
But the question, if you get a piece of your big software and you converted it to microservice, any element in your architecture, there is a lot of relation for this part in the old application.
Yeah.
You said that we are going to convert it to the new architecture, and you will accept the risk if this make a problem related to the unknown relations with other parts in the system.
Yeah.
Okay, but who will pay the cost for this risk if it's happened in the new architecture? Because most probably you are going to release it to production.
Yeah.
Who will pay the cost of this risk if the risk happened?
So
Did we change the culture of the customer to accept that such kind of risk or not? Because it's very important to engage with them, telling them that our change will make some risks.
yeah.
And you have to accept those risks in order to move up, to survive,
Yeah.
because you are part of the ecosystem
Yeah.
and you have to accept this challenge or this risk. Am I true or wrong?
No, you're absolutely right, and there's a number of things to consider, and one of them is that there is always a trade-off in everything in life. I think most people are kind of like, yeah,
Yes.
swap one thing for another thing. What we're trading off here is our inability to do small changes. So everything has to be big batch-related dependencies in scenario one, the monolith. What we're trading it off against is the ability to do small changes, but an increase in our architectural complexity. The good news is that there are tools like Kubernetes and other things out there that really help us manage that complexity, so people are recognising that. In terms of we're going to make this change that's going to impact somebody else, this is very similar to a conversation that we had this morning frequently, which is that when we are trying to transition to an agile working model, we are generally doing it as technology people. And we are doing it to the benefit of the business and our customer, whether that's our internal customer or our external customer. But very often, they haven't got a clue what Agile is. They don't know what we're doing. If they've heard of it, they don't really understand it. So part of our job is to help inform and coach those people around us about why we want to do it. And the other consideration is this stuff that we talked about minutes ago. So in terms of the risk, if you're having a conversation with your partner or your customer about wanting to change the way that you